start, yeah, once you're posted. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Code Seminar. We have a really exciting speaker, JP, who's an associate professor at the University College London at the School of Management. So just some housekeeping. So we'll be recording this session. This will also later be posted on the Code YouTube channel. Also, there will be time for Q&A afterwards, and you're also very welcome to post any questions in the chat. Okay, so JP, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. So I want to talk a bit about my work on decentralized platforms, trying to define what they are and how can we tell for sure just how decentralized exactly they might be. So the background to this story takes place in the world of tech, quote unquote. And you might remember that about 10 years ago, we had a lot of founders who were joining the tech startup scene, promising to disrupt an industry. And they were using that term very frequently. I feel that in many ways, these kind of heydays of the Web 2 era have been replaced by a new mantra in the world of Web 3, which is the promise not to disrupt an industry anymore, but to decentralize it. I think in many ways, the meaning of disruption is as unclear as the meaning of decentralization. It may even be that those two terms are used as synonyms or interchangeably by some of those startup funders. And so I'm going to try to bring some clarity to the meaning of decentralization today. Okay. All right, so the buzz around decentralization is quite interesting to track. Here's an example of a quote by a very famous CEO claiming that business is rapidly becoming decentralized and it desires to be. I was very happy to find this quote from the CEO of a large meatpacking company, because that's a quote that dates from 1924. So you can see that the buzz started a long time ago. It's just become more intense. Closer to us, you'll have people claiming that Google is decentralized and lets 1,000 flowers bloom. That's 10 years ago. And even closer to us, you'll have people saying, you know what has never crashed? The decentralized infrastructure of Bitcoin, unlike the centralized one of Google, right? So you see here two quotes, one saying that Google is decentralized and one using Google as an example of being centralized, right? So there's this apparent contradiction. And I think this contradiction comes from the fact that we have a buzzword, and behind that buzzword, we have a bit of a conceptual lack of clarity. The paradox, I think, is that on the one hand, decentralization can imply the delegation of authority, right? So you add a layer of middle management, you're delegating authority, and some people will claim that this is decentralization. On the other hand, there's a long history centralization being debunked because delegating is just creating a hierarchy of authority. And as Edith Penrose argued a long time ago already, managerial hierarchies leave untouched the accumulation of ultimate responsibility. So, you know, as long as you still have a CEO on top, you can add managers around that person. That's not really changing anything to the fact that you have a centralized hierarchy. And so I'm going to run a little quiz with you here today. It's a very easy one, but it will help us kind of get started with this conversation. So look at this initial organizational structure and imagine that they're deciding to reorganize and become the structure that you see on the right. My question for you today is, what is the effect of this reorganization on the extent of decentralization? So if you go to menti.com on your phone, for instance, you can enter the code that you see on the screen, and you can vote to tell me what you think is the effect of that reorganization. And I will share the votes with you. It's completely anonymous. Obviously, I don't see who's voting what. And I'll share the results in like 1 minute. So we can all get a sense of who believes what today among our audience. Okay, very suspenseful. We already have a few votes in. It's coming in. So you got 3 options. The reorganization increases decentralization, the reorganization decreases decentralization, or, you know, a cop-out. I always like to give people a cop-out when the question is a little tricky. I think that's fair game. Okay. So we've got seven votes in. So let me see what we got so far. So far we have.
So just JP, FY, we're seeing your PowerPoint right now. I think that's deliberate, right? We're not seeing the
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm checking the results. I'll just share them with you orally because I don't want to take the risk of not being able to go back to the PowerPoints.
Yeah.
So okay, so out of 10 answers, 33% of you said it increases decentralization, 22% say it decreases decentralization, and 44%, wait, is this a trick question? So we have almost like an even split vote across the 3 options. And it's a very small sample, but know that it's a sample of experts. And so I will just take this result for now and interpret it as, you know, we just don't know. You know, we're management experts. Surely we should know a thing or two about managerial hierarchies and decentralization. And yet we see there's not a lot of consensus among ourselves about this question that seems to be actually quite simple on the surface. So hopefully by the end of the talk, I'll be able to provide an answer to this question, and it will be satisfactory to some of you, probably not to all of you, but I commit to providing an answer to the question and going back to the survey results. Okay. What do I mean as a starting point by centralization? So when we talk about digital platforms, which will be the entity that I'm interested in today, we are used to seeing what I would call corporate platforms. So corporate platforms, they're structured in this way. There's a platform corporation that sits on top. So for instance, Meta, and then that platform owns, designs, and controls and runs one or multiple digital platforms. So in the case of Meta, that would be Facebook.com, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. But you do have a platform corporation on top that acts as a platform owner, a platform sponsor, a platform designer, and then there's a CEO on top of that platform corporation that can basically decide to reverse any kind of decision that's made anywhere in this ecosystem of platforms. Now, what happens when we leave the realm of centralization? Well, presumably, we don't have that platform corporation anymore. And that's what I call decentralized platforms. Now, imagine a digital platform that does not have a CEO, that is not incorporated, that doesn't have headquarters, that does not have managers, that does not have its own computers and servers, that doesn't even have any employees. And imagine that that digital platform manages to have millions of users and a market capitalization of like, I don't know, $500 million, of like $500 billion. Now, would that be possible? Yes. In fact, it is possible. We have platforms like this. The most famous one is called Bitcoin. We never had anything like that in history before, but now we have it. That's what I call a decentralized platform. So how did I get into this? But I want to say just a few words about my research trajectory leading up to this, so you know where I'm coming from. I actually encountered Bitcoin for the first time when I was working on finishing a book about the history of piracy and capitalism, and that was published in 2013. And at the time, I got to interview hackers, internet hackers, if you wish, who were in the early 1990s developing cryptography in using open source software. At the time, they were in trouble because cryptography was considered a weapon by the U.S. government, and some of these people ended up in jail because they were emailing other hackers across the U.S. borders to talk about cryptography, which at the time was considered an illegal export of weapons, hence the prison time. Now, I realized upon talking to some of these people that some of the building blocks using cryptography that they had developed in the 90s ended up being reused by a mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008 when they published the Bitcoin white paper. And that's how I basically encountered Bitcoin for the first time. And I thought, oh, this is interesting, coming out of hacker groups. It's essentially grounded in piratical innovation. A lot of the stuff in the early days were basically illegal. That sounds like something for me. And so I dived into this and developed a series of research projects around Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and the possibilities for decentralized forms of organizing over the years. And so this is where I'm at today, and this is where it's coming from. Okay. So on the one hand, we have centralized / corporate platforms. These can be more or less centralized. And then on the other hand, we have decentralized platforms, and presumably they can be more or less decentralized. But notwithstanding these like quantitative differences, there's definitely a qualitative difference between these two types of digital platforms. Today, I will be focusing on the decentralized platforms, and I will be focusing on these quantitative differences, like how can we capture them and what does it mean? So why is it important to look at this? I'll give you a couple of examples. First, in the United States, there's been claims by the SEC that whether the platform that is issuing a digital token is decentralized enough or not can result in the token itself being considered a security or not. So basically, how decentralized you are can have implications for securities regulations. It can also have implications for determining whether the platform is a publisher or just an intermediary that's enabling decentralized content sharing. So that has implication for regulations around speech and liability. Here's an example about Airbnb being deemed to be a content publisher and not an intermediary in a country that I picked at random that has nothing to do with my accent, just to give you an example of the implications. And then finally, I think this has implications for determining whether a digital entity is an unregulated business entity, which can be illegal because they should be regulated and incorporated if they are a business entity, or if it's just a bunch of friends who just happen to share a multi-signature wallet. And so just how decentralized you are can have implications for whether you have legal personhood or not. So these things matter. Policymakers care about this across the world and also have different approaches. So hopefully what I'm presenting today will resonate with these considerations. Okay, I'm going to quiz you again, but this time less formally. There won't be a survey. Just look at the image and try to answer this question for yourself. Is this stuff decentralized? I'm giving you a second. Trying to guess what's going through your mind, I would say you're not quite sure. And I would say the reason why you're not quite sure may have something to do with the fact that my diagram lacks boundaries. So let me try to add some boundaries and see if it helps. Now, is this stuff decentralized? Now, I'm suspecting that some of you are now thinking, yeah, it looks fairly decentralized because the dots are like randomly / evenly dispersed within the circle. But obviously, if I change the size of the circle, you might change your mind. Now you might think, no, this stuff is not decentralized because all the red dots are actually located very close to the center of the circle. What I'm getting at here is that it really matters where the boundaries of the platform are if you want to determine how decentralized the platform is. If you don't know where the boundaries are, you can't answer the question. So what are platform boundaries? Where are they? Where do we place them? I'm going to argue that platform boundaries should be placed around the contributors who have authority over the platform. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you're looking at the Bitcoin digital platform, for instance, people who use Bitcoin wallets, they definitely have some authority about what goes on in the platform. They can sign transactions. They can move Bitcoin around, right? So I would place wallet users within the boundaries of the platform for that reason. And likewise, the miners who create new Bitcoin tokens are within the boundaries. Likewise, the software developers who create the code that runs Bitcoin also are within the boundaries of the Bitcoin platform. Now, what about aliens with a giant laser? And that's probably not what you think I was going to talk about next, but it's very important because imagine that there's like aliens with a giant laser and they're pointing it from outer space. They're pointing it at planet Earth. And just in one shot, they are destroying planet Earth altogether. If they did that, surely the planet Earth would represent a single point of failure because it would destroy all of Bitcoin in just one go. All the computers, all the wallet users, all the developers, all the miners, everything would be gone in one go. So in a way, you could say that Bitcoin has a single point of failure. I mean, just look at the photo. And if it has a single point of failure, a lot of people would argue then it is not decentralized. And you can't really disagree with that logic. What you can disagree with is whether aliens with a giant laser are relevant at all to discussing the decentralization of Bitcoin as a platform. And what I would argue is that they're not. They're completely irrelevant because they have no authority on the Bitcoin platform, even though they can destroy it, but they just don't have legitimate authority on the platform. They're outside the platform. Okay, so now what do I mean by decentralization? I'm going to try to stop using this term, decentralization, because I think it's very slippery. I think I've proved my point with the initial survey that you had to fill. Instead of decentralization, I'm going to talk about the dispersion of authority. What do I mean by the dispersion of authority? I mean two things. Going back to theories of management and organization, for the Second World War, looking at work by Herbert Simon in particular, you see that authority is defined as consisting of two things: having information and having access to information, having access to decision-making within an organization. So I'm going to look separately at those two dimensions. And so the horizontal axis is information dispersion, can be low, can be high, and same goes for decision-making. You can have low dispersion of that or high dispersion of that within an organization. That creates four ideal types. Let's look at the first one so you understand what I mean by that, the one in the top left corner. In that diagram, you have 7 organizational members. Only one can make decisions. That's the one in blue, right? If you're white, you cannot make decisions. So decision making is very, very concentrated here. There's only one member that makes all the decisions. So there's very low dispersion of decision making. And likewise, you can see that the agents can communicate, but they always have to go through the blue member. And so information can only circulate in a very concentrated fashion going through that blue node in the middle. And so you have very low information dispersion. Now, if you wanted to disperse information within that organization, what you could do is create peer-to-peer communication channels, which is what you see in the top right corner, where every agent on the platform can now reach out to any other agent peer-to-peer using one of the dotted channels. Now you have maximum dispersion of information, but you still have very, very concentrated decision-making. You still only have one person, agent in blue, that can make decisions. If you wanted to change that and disperse decision-making, what you'd have to do, and that's the bottom left corner, is delegate decision-making authority by having more than one blue agent, having multiple blue agents who can make decisions, contribute to decisions in various ways. Now we're having some dispersion of decision-making. If we wanted to maximize the dispersion of information and decision-making, what it would look like is the bottom right diagram. You see that all the agents are equal shade of blue. So they all contribute equally to all the decisions that need to be made. And they all have access equally, evenly to all the information that exists. And they can tap into that peer-to-peer with any other member in the organization. So now with that design, we have full dispersion of information and decision-making. And so we have full dispersion of authority. Okay. Now, if you really like those terminology around decentralization and distribution, we could say that information dispersion is decentralization. We could decide to call it this way, and we could call decision-making dispersion distribution. So we could speak of decentralized information and distributed decision-making, right? I don't know that it necessarily simplifies the conversation, but it allows us to kind of bring those two terms that people like into the conversation while distinguishing them. In fact, there's a paper written by one of your colleagues with co-authors that I really, really like. I don't know if Marty is with us today, but this paper really unpacks very well how a blockchain-based platform, hi Marty, I've seen your hand, relies on a dispersed form of decision-making and really contrasts this dispersion of decision-making with the traditional centralized digital platforms, the corporate ones, in my own terminology. So if you haven't read this paper, take a look. It's a great one. So moving on now to after having defined authority dispersion, I'm moving on to measuring it. Okay, now we know what it is. How do we measure it so we can tell, oh, platform A is more has more authority dispersion or less than platform B? How can we tell? So I will just try to give you an intuition of my measurement approach in the context of decision-making dispersion. And I'm going to use an example that has nothing to do with digital platforms. So even if that's not your area of study, hopefully you'll feel comfortable with it. So imagine in the United States that there's 3 types of political decisions that can be made. You can decide to pass an executive order. It turns out there's only one person in the United States out of 350 million people, roughly, who can actually make that decision. That's the president. Another type of decision you can make is passing a new law. And there's about 500 people who can actually make that decision. They're members of the US Congress. And then there's a third kind of lower level, in a way, type of decision that can be made, and that's voting, electing representatives. And there's about 200 million people in the US who can do that. They're the people who are citizens and are at least 18 years old, right? Now you can see, looking at this example, that what it would look like to increase the dispersion or to decrease the dispersion of decision making. If we wanted to have maximum dispersion of decision making, then we should give the right to make these decisions to everyone. And if we wanted to minimize decision making dispersion, then maybe only one person should be allowed to pass a new law. Only one person should be allowed to pass an executive order, and then the rest would be maybe allowed to vote, but nothing else, right? So if you can conceptualize what the maximum dispersion looks like, what the minimum dispersion looks like, then the only piece that's missing to measure the whole thing is to have some kind of dispersion index that can capture the extent of dispersion between that minimum and that maximum. And that is what I've been developing using theory, drawing on entropy in information science. I'm not going to delve into the mathematics of my formula. It would be boring and quite long. I just want to make sure you understand the intuition behind it. So how I've given you an example in the political system of the United States. Now, how does it look like on a decentralized platform? So think of Bitcoin. Even if you don't know Bitcoin, I think it should be clear enough to you. So on the Bitcoin platform, decision-making rights are dispersed across agents as well. So there's about 15 million agents who can decide to sign a transaction. These people are called colloquially, I cannot say this word. These people are called wallet users. Then there's about 15,000 agents who can decide to accept or reject a new block of transactions. They're called full nodes. And then there's about 30 agents, roughly, who can decide to order pending transactions inside the new blocks. They're called mining pools. So you can see by analogy with the United States that you also have different types of decisions. And for each type of decisions, you have agents who are allowed to contribute to the making the decision and agents who are not. And likewise, you can have more or less dispersion of those decision-making rights across agents. So what I've done basically is list all the important decisions that need to be made to run a blockchain platform that are basically the same for any blockchain platform. And then I've counted the agents that are in each platform and at each point in time allowed to contribute to making those decisions or not allowed to contribute making those decisions. And then with my standardized complex mathematical formula, I end up with an index that ranges between 0 and 100%. 0 means you have minimum dispersion and 100 maximum dispersion. So the data set looks like something like that, right? So you see here over time, quarter per quarter since the creation of Bitcoin, I am counting how many developers there are. So that's the light blue. How many people are able to create new blocks? That's the black histograms that you see at the beginning a lot, and then you don't see them as much. The number of full nodes in orange, the number of wallet users, that's the brown line, etc. Right? And then I've looked at those 5 agents because they're the ones that can make different types of decisions. And I've looked at 6 very important types of decision, if I recall well, for this particular situation. And based on this data, I'm able to compute my index that's based on the theory of entropy. And this is what I obtain at the end of the day. So here you have the standardized index that shows you the evolution of Bitcoin's decision dispersion from its creation to the end of 2022, quarter per quarter. So you see that dispersion was 80% at first for a couple of years, and then it decreased rapidly, bottomed out at the end of 2016, and then started increasing again since 2016. Then I did the same thing for my other dimension of authority, which is related to information dispersion. And using a similar approach and intuition, I calculated that for Bitcoin quarter per quarter. And you see it started off really high, almost maximum dispersion of information, above 90%. And now it's been down, bottomed out in 2017, and it's been increasing quite a bit since then. And it's now around 55%. Now, if I take the average of my 2 dimensions, just for the purpose of providing an overview, I call this average authority dispersion, and this is how it's been evolving for the Bitcoin platform between its creation until the end of 2022. Now, once we have this kind of data measuring authority dispersion, we can investigate whether it has an effect on the market value of the platform, which is, you see the price, it's the grayed out area in the background. That's the price of Bitcoin on a logarithmic scale. You can also see if the authority dispersion within the platform has an effect on various types of risk. So as an example, the orange histograms here are the cybersecurity attacks, so cybersecurity risk that have touched the Bitcoin platform. We could investigate whether authority dispersion affects that as well. Or we can also compare the authority dispersion of Bitcoin with that of Ethereum, which I have done. I'm not going to show that to you today, but or compared with Avalanche, or compared with Polygon, or any other blockchain platform. And we could answer this question that a lot of people want to answer in the industry, like which digital platform is the most decentralized in Web3 or in the blockchain industry? And we could actually provide a quantified answer to this question. We could also compare those platforms with other platforms that are not blockchain-based, that are not technically decentralized, but that are comparable in terms of their use case. So if you think that Bitcoin is a payment network, then maybe we could compare Bitcoin with the Swift payment network, which interestingly has about the same number of full nodes as Bitcoin. A full node in the Swift payment network is a member bank or a member financial institution that's part of the network. There's about 15,000 of them, which is very similar number as what we find in Bitcoin. We could compare that over time as well. Okay, so now I can debunk a myth in the industry, in the Web3 industry, and all those people that are promising to decentralize Industry X, just like people used to promise disrupting Industry X. If Web3 is about the stack of protocols that enable fully decentralized applications, then I'm sorry to say that Web3 has not yet happened. Because what would it mean to have a fully decentralized digital platform? It would mean the bottom right diagram. And it would mean, for instance, in the case of Bitcoin, that every agent on the digital platform would have to run a full node, be a validator node, contribute to all the decisions, propose new software code, and basically be present across the board. That's not at all what we observe. We are very far from 100%. And so it is not fully decentralized. Fully decentralized would mean we are 100%. We're not. But now I can just say just how much we are, how decentralized we are, by distinguishing between information dispersion and decision-making dispersion. Indeed, if a platform user is not running their own nodes and doing all these things, then your blockchain platform is just a decentralization theater. It's a bit of a scam, or at least it's making claims that are fraudulent. Okay, going back to the quiz, what is the effect of this reorganization on the extent of decentralization? Right. So first, you'll note that the wording of my question was ambiguous, right? Because nobody has the same understanding of decentralization. Hopefully now, if you think in terms of dispersion of decision making and dispersion of information, it becomes a lot easier to answer the question. So if you look at the dispersion of decision making, in the initial scenario here, you have three decision makers, right? You have the big boss, and then you have two small bosses or middle managers, if you like to call them so. In the post-reorganization scenario, you don't have middle managers anymore. You only have one big boss. So you only have one decision maker instead of three. So the dispersion of decision making has decreased. It did not increase, it decreased. It's more concentrated than before. Now, you've probably heard the corporate talk by companies like Google, Facebook, etc. over the years, advocating for their flat hierarchical structures and how cool and democratic that is. Well, this is how a flat hierarchical structure looks like. You're removing a few decision makers and concentrating decision-making authority. It is not democratic. In fact, it could be very much the opposite. Now, what about the effect of the reorganization on the dispersion of information? Well, I would say it depends. It's probably decreased as well, because now you see that all the information is transiting through the big boss, and it's no longer intermediated and broken down by middle managers. So if we assume that the frontline people cannot talk to each other peer-to-peer and always have to talk to their boss before, then the dispersion of information has decreased as well. If we assume that the frontline people can talk peer-to-peer, then the scenario might be a little bit different. So hopefully I've provided an answer to the survey question that makes sense based on my framework. Now, closer to you, we're probably forgetting about Bitcoin and things like that. Think about the organizational design of your own faculty department or school or university, whatever it's called, at your institution. You might think, okay, what about information dispersion or decentralization in my faculty? How many people have access to faculty workload information? Like, do you know who was negotiating a teaching relief with the dean, for instance? Is that public? Can you access that information, or only a few people can? How many have access to the budget of your faculty? The programs, breakdown, cost, revenues. Is that public? Is it transparent to you? And now thinking about the dispersion of decision-making in your faculty, how many among you have a vote for the creation or the cancellation of a new MSc program? How many of you have a vote in hiring and promotion decisions? Is it only the full professors who can vote on promotion or hiring, or is it everyone? And how many people? And you see that comparing your faculty with another faculty at a different institution, maybe you would find differences. Any faculty has to make the same kind of decisions and have to deal with the same kind of information. Just how dispersed those two things will be, it's going to depend on the faculty and how it's been designed. And it could lead to different outcomes in terms of performance, growth, workplace well-being, and whatnot. Okay, I'm done. So takeaways. Platform decentralization can and should be measured, and data on the extent to which platforms are first authority. These data are a must-have, I think, for policymakers. I should have for platform developers and executives, for those who are working in corporate platforms. Probably a nice to have for consumers who want to understand really who they're entrusting with their assets, their money, their whatever. And I would say a need to measure construct for platform scholars. One study that I have looked back at, made by some of your colleagues, is this one. And I felt like this was it's a great paper by Richard and Annabelle, and that looks at how the same strategy implemented by a digital platform can be successful or fail depending on the broader industry architecture, the kind of regulatory and standard framework that is used country to country in the case of the paper. But I feel that the extent of decentralization and distribution of digital platforms might be a very important contingent kind of factor that would interact with that architecture, for instance. So that could be a possible avenue for future research for platform scholars to look at the interaction between these things. And with that, I will open the floor to questions, comments, and discussion. Thank you very much for playing along with the survey and listening to me.